Welcome to European Journeys. This is the second stage of a series that takes us to Sweden and where we discover how Christianity came to Sweden, how Sweden was Christianized. In our first stage, we were in Gamla Uppsala, near the modern-day city of Uppsala. And today we are going to go to a place that is 50 kilometers south or so from Uppsala, in the midst of one of the major lakes of Sweden, that is Lake Mälaren. There are many islands there, over 1,000 indeed. Some of them are inhabited, but most of them are uninhabited. And one of those, the one that we will discover today, is not inhabited. And that is the island called Björkö. It's in the municipality of Ekerö, some 30 kilometers west from Stockholm or so. Now, Björkö is not ordinary. It's not an ordinary island indeed. In fact, as we approach the island, we begin to see, already from far away, a tall cross on top of a rocky hill. And then when we enter on the island, we discover a Viking museum. We discover also the reconstruction of a Viking village. And if we walk even a bit more inland, we discover a chapel. So why are there all these markers there? In fact, the museum and the reconstruction of the village are testimonies to the fact that there was a town here that was established towards the 8th century, and that town was called Björkö. Now, why was there a town here? Now, we have to understand the context of the time. We are in fact in the age called the Viking Age, and the Viking Age is a time in which the Vikings began to go out from Scandinavia, and they often didn't go with very peaceful intentions. In fact, they caused a lot of havoc wherever they went, whether towards the British Isles, but also to Germany, to modern-day Netherlands, Belgium, northern France, and also towards Russia and Ukraine. Wherever they went, they were not there really with peaceful intentions. But they also began to trade with those people. And in fact, Björkö was built as a trading center for those relationships, for those trading relationships that began to happen. And in fact, many objects found on this island come from faraway lands, even up to the Middle East, in fact. So Björkö is a very important place to understand Sweden, ancient Sweden. But why is there a cross there? Why a chapel? In fact, both the cross and the chapel are named after a man called Ansgar. And Ansgar is known to be the apostle to the Norse. He was, in fact, most probably the first missionary to put his feet in Sweden. Now, who was Ansgar? The sources we have from him come from the chronicler from Bremen called Adam, and also from his own biographer named Rimbert, who lived some 7 decades after Ansgar, Rimbert or Rimbert. So Ansgar was born in the northern part of France, and he became a monk in Germany, which at the time was the Frankish Empire, which had just been Christianized some decades earlier with Charlemagne. And in fact, in his time, a Danish prince named Harald Klak came with his wife with the intention to be baptized in the Frankish Empire. So he went to the Frankish court, he took his baptism with his wife, and he promised the Frankish court that he would take with him a missionary to go and evangelize the Danes. So that missionary was chosen, and that was Ansgar indeed. And so he went to Denmark with the prince and his wife. But the mission was short-lived. Somehow it didn't work, and so Ansgar returned to his monastery. Now, some years later, some Swedish officials came and asked to the Frankish court to teach Christianity to their own people. Now that sounds very surprising, that some people coming from the Swedish court would ask the Frankish court to send missionaries to teach Christianity. Why did they do so? Well, we don't know, but maybe they realized how Christianity began to transform the Frankish Empire, and they maybe wanted to have that for their own land. Well, we simply don't know. Maybe it was just political. We don't know. But nevertheless, it's very interesting that they would want Christianity to be taught in their land. So who was chosen? Well, you have guessed, that was Ansgar again. So Ansgar agreed to go with the Swedish officials, and they traveled back the long distance until Björkö, and that's where he established his first mission. Now the mission lasted some 2 years, and 2 years later, Ansgar returned to Germany, and this time he was appointed the Archbishop of Hamburg, which would be the diocese that would oversee the mission in Scandinavia from then on. Ansgar appointed other missionaries, among whom a man named Godberg and his nephew Nita, who went together there to Björkö, but it didn't work quite well. Nita was murdered. That shows how the times were so unstable in Sweden at the time. He was murdered, and so Godberg decided to return, and he became the bishop of Osnabrück in Germany. And for a long period of time, for 7 years, no missionaries sent there. And so obviously one could wonder what did happen to that church that had been established by Ansgar, that was nurtured by Godberg's mission as well. Well, 7 years later, Ansgar sent another missionary named Ardgar, and he went there and discovered that there was still a small Christian community in the town of Björkö. And there we read of a beautiful story of a lady called Friedeburg, and she had a bottle of wine next to her bed, just in case if she were dying, she could just take the last rites. If there were no priest or no pastor to give it to her, she would take it herself. Now, obviously, we're in Roman Catholic times. The last rites were very important, were seen as crucial for the life of a person. And so she kept that bottle of wine just next to her bed. Well, finally, she saw that missionary coming, and so I guess that she was able to receive the last rites by that missionary, maybe. Finally, Ansgar returned himself to Björkö, and he would stay for a much longer period. And that came the crucial event, not only for the mission in Björkö, but probably for Christianity in Sweden altogether. In fact, the church was growing, Christianity was growing, and that began to threaten the strong paganism, pagan religion that was there. It was still very strong. There were pagan priests. They began to feel threatened by the growth of Christianity. Now, those pagan priests wanted, in fact, to make the dead king called Erik as their god, to establish him as a god. And so obviously that came into conflict with the Christian worldview, which does not accept any other god but the Almighty God, as Jesus Christ, God. So that came into conflict, and the Swedish court was a bit in a dilemma there. So they decided to ask their gods what to do with the mission. Is the mission something good for Sweden or not? And so they asked their own gods, the pagan gods, what do we do with that mission? And so they threw the lot. And we don't know really how they did that, but the outcome was that the answer was favorable towards the mission. And so they said, no, we keep the mission, we keep going with the mission there in Björkö. And not only they kept going with the mission there in Björkö, but they now agreed that the Christian faith could be even propagated outside of Björkö to the Swedish mainland, which at the time was just the province of Uppland. So Christianity began to expand in the province of Uppland. Now that tells a lot about the Christian worldview and the pagan worldview, because in fact the pagans wanted to establish a dead king as God. So that shows that it is not from the pagan religion that you find the value of human equality. That really comes from the Bible. We had talked about that in our previous episode. But the Bible, which teaches that we are all made in the image of God, is the ground for human equality, which has been so much upheld in Sweden even up to this day. So that breakthrough, that lot cast, really was a breakthrough for Sweden and for the expansion of Christianity, and through Christianity, the expansion of such values that are so important for free societies. Now, what happened to Björkö? Because now it's just a deserted island, where in fact the Christian mission itself, after the death of Ansgar, so Ansgar stayed many years, then he returned to Germany where he died towards the mid-9th century. And after him went other missionaries. We know even of an archbishop of Bremen, Hamburg, Bremen, called Uni, who came to Björkö and who died in Björkö. And another missionary, in fact, that Rambert that I talked about, who is the biographer of Ansgar, also came as a missionary to Björkö. But after that, we don't have any more information about the mission there. And in fact, the city itself disappears from the records towards the 10th century. But nevertheless, even though the city died out, the mission died out in the city, and the city died altogether, Christianity, in fact, has known a great breakthrough through those times, and the Christianity did not disappear from Sweden. So that's for the ancient town of Björkö and the mission that was started there. And in the next episode, we are going to discover more about how Christianity expanded in Sweden. I'm Cedric Placentino. See you next week for another stage of European Journeys.